We're back with the Zollverein. Sorry that this font is so hard to read. Now, the Zollverein is hugely important because this entire unit, Unit 3 of AICE European History, is about German unification and the domination of the German states by Prussia. At the beginning, they're dominated by Austria as part of this remnant to this old ancient thing called the Holy Roman Empire. The Zollverein is a German customs union, and it's going to be the means by which the German states start organizing on their own. So if you're writing an essay on unification, the Zollverein is very important. Okay, so anyway, going to just let you read all this stuff. So there's all these different Germanic countries. And some people, this is much like in Italy, during this time, many Italians want to join a country called Italy, a country for Italians. Many Germans want that. But there's tons and tons of German states. And their political unification came after their economic unification. So anyway, because they're centrally located in the German states in Europe, they can trade with both Russia and France, Eastern and Western Germany. 70% of the German states are agricultural, not a lot of industrialization yet, just a few patches of it. And here's what little industrialization there is. Textiles, consumer goods. Their railroads develop after the 1840s, and eventually they're going to have coal and iron production. And so once you get all the coal and the iron production, all this stuff going on, it spurs more growth of the industrial areas. And this part of Europe had been devastated by the Napoleonic Wars because of the repeated invasions and attacks, and also because of all the tariff barriers put in by Napoleon. And so anyway, I'm not going to draw the chart again, but what I did was I did on my classroom board, I had like 5 countries listed side by side. And I said, okay, country A, B, C, D, and E. And country A makes a bicycle and ships it to country E. Well, let's say they made it and they were willing to sell it for $100. But every time they go through a country that charged them a $10 tariff, country B, country C, country D, and then country E, the price of the bicycle has gone up from $100 to $140. And so all the fees involved and all the paperwork, checking shipments as they cross borders, increases the cost. So largely what they wanted to do amongst the German states was reduce tariff barriers. So this is going to make them economically integrated, if not politically. And anyway, a lot of the foreign countries didn't have any tariffs. So it was kind of a big economic handicap for the Germanic states to have them. And anyway, Prussia took the lead, not Austria, Prussia in 1818. It abolished 67 internal customs barriers, and it encouraged other German states to do the same. Now, as I've said in the previous video, Unit 3 this year, 24-25, is going to be paper 1. This is some of the other teachers I work with say that Germany is the most complicated of all the units, and I would generally think that it was the French Revolution. But after looking at this lecture, I might agree that it is Germany. So this is an awful lot to memorize. And maybe you don't really want to memorize it if you're doing a paper 1. But you want to recognize these terms. Prussia is taking the lead of the Zollverein. Austria has the lead in the Confederation. The Austrians are ruled by the Habsburgs. The Prussians are ruled by the Hohenzollerns. Anyway, moving on. They charged tariff on their own frontier. Anyway, but they were low tariffs. And a lot of countries charge like very small tariffs, and it's not even so much a tariff as it is a paperwork processing fee. So if you're going to, like for instance, if you're importing cars from Japan and the United States, and the United States charges $10 per car, that wouldn't really be considered a tariff. That's more like a paperwork fee to pay the customs official who's doing the work. But they wanted all these tariffs removed in the Confederation to create a larger market. And so during this time, as they did that, there appear to be new railroads and railways appear, and eventually steamboats. So if their goal was to give some impetus to economic development, is clearly working. All right, so the Zollverein and the rise of Prussia. And you can kind of see here, if you want to zero in on this map, this is from the Cambridge textbook. You can see Prussia is pretty large compared to the other German states, and Austria is down there beneath. But you'll notice that the Prussians, whether they're doing this by design or by happenstance, Prussia's power and its dominance is going to increase because of the Zollverein. Very important for you to know. All right. Anyway, so here we go. It's a customs union of 18 German states. And here's a definition of a customs union. I'm not going to insult you by reading that, but you want to know the definition. Austria did not join. And Austria is kind of, is very conservative, of course. So is Prussia. But they're not recognizing the importance of economic change. And they preferred high tariffs on other countries. As I record this, the United States is in this tremendous turmoil over these tariffs that have been here. And this is not a political video. I teach AP economics, and it's a much more interest in that class than this one. But you can see that tariffs are generally designed. They're generally referred to as protective tariffs. They make goods coming in from other countries more expensive. And usually the purpose for that is so you buy goods made in your own country. The theory is you'll provide goods, you provide jobs to your own country's citizens. On the other hand, if your country is not as good at making these products and they're being protected by tariffs, there's no real incentive for your country's factories to make stuff cheaper and better, because most people are going to buy the cheapest thing they can get. So it kind of hurts the quality. Yes, I'm being very anti-tariff. I did tell you I was an economics teacher, but it makes the quality generally go down in the goods made, and it makes them more expensive. So if your goal is to help your citizens, it's a two-edged sword. It may help them, but it also hurts them by causing the cost of living or inflation to go up. All right, number one reason Prussia unifies the German states, not Austria. You might want to underline this, circle this, whatever. Name your first child after this little joke there. Anyway, it becomes determined to keep Austria out because they kind of like their dominant position and the economic growth happening in the north. Remember, the southern states are Catholic, the northern states are Protestant. So as this time goes by, Prussia is starting to become more dominant economically. The Habsburgs are still more dominant politically. And so the member states in the Zollverein, and this is getting quite complicated. So if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, as I tell my students all the time, this is complicated stuff here. A lot to remember, but the member states in the Zollverein insist all political decisions had to be unanimous, which meant there was a lot of agreement on things they did, but also probably not very much got done. All right. And so sorry again about the typos, the German nationalists could not really wrap their mind around where they wanted this. They wanted a unified Germany. But they didn't really know where they want the borders to be. That's a big source of contention. What's going to be in, what's going to be out. And this is very important. As time goes by, and I tell my students, this is an argument going on amongst the smart people. As Heimler, who does a lot of review videos, if you take AP history, you must know that, he calls this the thinky think people. And so there's two theories here. One is that you have a larger Germany, that's Großdeutschland. You want to memorize this because even if you're writing a paper one, you want to drop in extra facts to enhance your score. As I tell my students, whoever grades their essays, I want them to look at my students' paper and be jealous that my students are not in their class. I want you just to rub your historical knowledge in their face and dare them to give you a low grade. That's actually a joke. Don't do that. But anyway, there's two plans amongst the thinky think people. The common Germans would not be sitting around thinking about this stuff. They're too busy living life, having fun, and paying bills. There's the larger Germany, Großdeutschland, which would include parts of German-speaking Austria. And there's Kleindeutschland, the smaller Germany dominated by Prussia. And Austria is going to be left out. And you can go ahead and write this down. Bismarck is going to come along, and he's going to lead Prussia into German unification under the Kleindeutschland plan. And to get just a little bit ahead of the game, and even though he's not covered in this, unit, you should get, points for knowing this. It is Hitler, who much later on, who is actually not Prussian or of Bavarian descent. He was born in Austria. He's Germanic, but he's a citizen of Austria. He's going to have Großdeutschland. He's going to put Austria and Prussia into one big Germany. Bismarck had the smaller one. And obviously after World War II and the defeat of the Nazi Germans, they broke Germany and Austria back apart and returned to the Kleindeutschland, smaller Germany. Very important for you to know. And largely it's because of this Protestant Catholic division. Remember, I've said this over and over ad nauseum. The southern German states are Catholic, the northern ones are Protestant. This will be important later on. Social and economic problems in the 1840s. 1848 is the year of revolutions, and I'm going to digress here a little bit. Remember, I have been an AP World History teacher and AP European History teacher for decades, and I've been in this game for a while. And this thing about prophetic, this is not going to get into whether you believe in, God or not or anything like that. But every now and then a book will come out, and it'll be very important history. And sometimes, at least to me, it seems that the year is almost prophetic. And in 1848, that is the year of revolutions. You want to memorize this. That has been a AICE essay question before, very likely to be one again. It's the year of revolutions. And the book that came out in 1848 was Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Now, I do a whole big lecture on Karl Marx, but he believed that society went through stages. He kind of predicted this. And, some people say there were 4 stages, some there were 7. But here's the 4 main ones. He believed that society would go from feudalism, which existed during the Middle Ages, into capitalism. And eventually, in capitalism, you would develop the upper class, the owner class, the bourgeoisie, and then you'd have the lower class, the proletariat. And eventually, the poor would get tired of the rich oppressing them and exploiting them. That's a key word they use. And there would be a revolution, and they would set up a workers' society. And that would be phase 3, which would be a socialist country. Okay? And then eventually, after hundreds of years or decades, these people would be so advanced, these socialists would be so advanced, they would go into the final phase of economic, evolution into communism, which is very interesting because we use the term communism all the time, but there technically has never been a communist country. And again, if you ask your teacher this, your teacher may say, whoever made this YouTube video is an idiot, but find somebody who studied some history. For there to be a communist country, there will be no government. So what happened was a socialist named Vladimir Lenin, which you'll learn about in Unit 4, he got so mad at the other socialists, he just decided to call his party the Bolshevik Party and go ahead and call themselves communist. So you're going to hear the term communist a lot when you're talking about North Korea and Cuba and places like that, but they are socialist countries. Anyway, I digress tremendously here, but that will help you in Unit 4. But the key thing is 1848 is the year of all these revolutions. They're known as the revolutions of 1848. That is the same year that Karl Marx sits in London and he writes his famous book, The Communist Manifesto, where he says the poor are going to throw the wealthy. Why this is important is because that's exactly what almost happened in 1848. And the other year there, 1776, I like to throw in, you might detect some bias in my lectures, and that would show your perceptiveness as a student. But there was a book published by a Scottish economist in 1776, a guy named Adam Smith, and it is called The Wealth of Nations. That's the short version. Most of these books have long names, but the short version is The Wealth of Nation is considered the Bible of capitalism, and that is also the birth year of the United States. And so people like me, proud Americans, will point that out, that these 2 books come out in years that something significant happens. All right, so keep in mind, you don't need to know the 1776 for this exam. That would just make you an educated, well-rounded person. But 1848 is certainly important. So what happens is Now we're going to get back to the 1840s before we get to 1848. There's popular uprisings all across Europe, started in France. Now the French have multiple revolutions throughout their history. And there's actually 5 republics in French history. And if you took AP European, you would have to learn that. Well, but you're not in AP European. But there was a revolution, and King Louis Philippe was toppled. And, well, actually, this does happen in 1848. So I guess we are heading towards the revolution's 1848. The first 1848 revolution was in France. And we're going to be talking about the revolutions of 1848 here for some time, and they are confusing, but they happen in several countries. And the Austrian Revolution of 1848 had Metternich flee the country. And that is the end of Metternich. He's not dead, but his influence is over, and it is the end of the so-called Age of Metternich, the end of this so-called conservative period in Central European history. Anyway, and it seemed for a time that the Austrian Empire and the conservative governments were falling or failing, but the revolutions all failed. So anyway, I think I'm going to go over these in more detail, and I'm just going to warn you, this will be kind of confusing, but there are multiple revolutions. The 3 big ones were the French one, the Austrian one, and the Prussian one. And there were also several in the German states that were not Prussian or Austrian. All of these revolutions failed. Now I'm going to go big picture here with you. There's multiple revolutions. Karl Marx writes his book and he goes, the poor are going to overthrow the rich. Well, I guess he finished his book too soon because all of them failed. It didn't happen. But what the people wanted was rights, and they were inspired by the American Revolution and the 1789 French Revolution. So these people wanted the same rights that these other countries had, and they all failed. But smart politicians like Bismarck realized, hey, listen, the people out there, mostly poor, but many middle class, they want rights. I'm a conservative. I'm talking about Bismarck, of course. He goes, I'm a conservative, and I want to preserve the power of the Prussian king. So to keep from being overthrown from the middle and lower classes, I'm going to give them a lot of what they want. And so a lot of people are going to think Bismarck is a liberal because he gives his people rights. He really isn't. He's a conservative, but he understands the power of liberalism as well as nationalism and all the rest of that. And he's going to try and prevent the overthrow of the Prussian monarch. All right, anyway, the cover of the Communist Manifesto. I threw this in just for the heck of it. Anyway, you can write this down. And I already told you this all failed, but, and you can look at this, there's several reasons for the revolution of 1848. Now, I have seen some of the paper 1s and 2s. They have, paper 2 A's and B's they've given on the revolutions of 1848. Those are pretty tough questions. And a paper 1, I'm not sure. There's also been a paper 1, I believe, in the past on the revolutions of 1848. So they are important. Hopefully your teacher did a good job on it. All right, now we're going to back up. What were the social problems in the 1840s? Poor living standards for the peasants, bad harvest, rising food prices, especially for workers in the cities. Because, the farms are out in the countryside, and there's a transportation cost. The people in the city usually have it pretty bad whenever there's a weak economic agricultural patch. The poor workers were protesting for better living standards. The skilled workers wanted trade unions and free education. When it says talk about here, I usually go off on a tangent to my AICE or my AP students about the value of the American public schools providing all this education to them for free. And, the number of countries around the world that, or at least in this hemisphere, that might not do that. All right, moving on here. Let's see. The outbreak of revolution in Germany. All right. So the educated middle class, motivated by liberalism and nationalism, they resented the power of the nobility, as I've stated before. They wanted to, they didn't want to get rid of the monarchs, but they wanted political reforms. They wanted constitutional monarchy. Now, we're going to mention a lot of these minor German states like Baden, and I'm not going to read all this stuff, but you can see the rights they're giving them are largely copied from the French, the Americans, and, the English Civil War back in the 1600s. We're going to skip most of this, but you'll recognize some of these things. And the liberal students wanted constitutional reforms, and I'm absolutely not going to go over the situation in the Middle East, so ignore that. But anyway, there was eventually a meeting scheduled in Frankfurt, Germany, to create a national assembly. Okay? All right, revolution in Prussia. Now, one thing they wanted to do in Prussia is the Junkers really own land out in eastern Prussia, right over there near Poland and Russia. Okay? And so what they wanted to do was, they're selfish individuals. They own all this landed estates in eastern Prussia. These are the Junkers, of course. And they wanted to be able to ship their agricultural products westward, or west from their eastern territories westward to France and to the other German states to sell them. So they were doing this to make money for themselves. Of course, this is going to cost a lot of money. And like a lot of capitalists, I don't know if you want to call these people capitalists, this is somewhat feudalism still, resembles feudalism, but you can consider this the beginning of capitalism. It's not fully developed, but obviously the Junkers are going to get the big benefit about this. What they wanted was everyone else to pay for it. So they had a meeting, the United Diet of 1847. They want to build support for the project. In what's going on in the background is there's crop failures out there and rising food prices. So they're doing this largely to benefit themselves. Now, there's also unrest, and I'm sorry this lecture is so tedious. And I imagine if you're watching this video is because you want a good grade on this exam. And as someone who's taught history for years, if you think this is boring, I'm on the same page. This is pretty detailed and pretty boring, but all the more reason, as I tell my students, to pass your exam the first time so you never have to take this again. This is quite detailed. Anyway, the skilled workers are upset. They're facing competition. A lot of the skilled workers made things by hand. Well, as they build more and more factories, they're made by machines, albeit many of them primitive machines. And so if you're paying someone a small wage to operate a machine, they can put a skilled worker out of work. Anyway, the members of the Diet, a lot of them are not Junkers. They wanted a constitution before they'd pay for the railway. And so the king refuses. He has some quote, I don't remember what it is exactly, that there should be no written piece of paper between God and country. In other words, the only thing that should exist between God and country is the king himself. And I don't remember why I wrote paraphrase here. Anyway, in March 1848, there's street disturbances in Berlin, and the rioters in Prussia are encouraged because the symbol of conservatism throughout Central Europe, maybe throughout all of Europe, is Metternich. He has fallen from power in Austria and fled the country. All right. Anyway, you can look at all this stuff here. A lot of these street protests were started by the craftsmen and the workers, and then the middle class demanded protection of their rights. The army could not control the street fighting, which stuns me because the Prussians have the best army in Europe, and it was left to the king, Frederick William, to calm the protesters. And many of the revolutions of 1848, like the French and the Austrian, were not that violent, but this one apparently was, which is unusual because most of these revolutionaries were relatively restrained and not that violent. All right. There was so much starvation in the 1840s. It was nicknamed the Hungry 40s. And here is something you want to asterisk this and underline this. Again, I don't know how important this is in a paper one, but there's all these revolutions fail, and the common denominator, and I may say this 4 or 5 times over the next few minutes, the common denominator in all the failure of these revolutions is you had the conservative upper class, and then you had these middle class revolutionaries and these working class people. And what they did was the working class, the poor, and the middle class would get together and protest the government and demand a new government. But the working class, who didn't really probably own any land, they would start discussing, hey, we need to take all the land and share it. Well, a lot of middle class people like owning land. And so all of a sudden these guys realize we're on the same side as these people who want to take over our property and You know, if you own property, I am a property owner, and I grew up in the rural South where owning your own farm and your own acreage and having, you know, a lot of space between you and your neighbors was just something just to be desired. I live in suburban Orlando, and so Apopka actually, which is near Orlando, and my relatives come down here and just can't believe that I don't have 20 acres and my house is not sitting in the middle of it. And so you take someone like that who believes in owning land, and you have a group of people who want to take it away because they're upset that you have it. That is not a recipe for harmony amongst the masses. And that is what is going to break all these revolutions down, because the owners, the conservatives, they're going to point out to the middle class, these people want to take what you have away. And that is going to, what I call, and you might want to write this down, that is going to split the coalition. All right. Anyway, there you see it. It's exploited by the rulers. Prussia emerges as the dominant German state during this time. Austria, at the outset of this entire period, was the senior partner. Prussia is the junior partner, but they're eventually going to become dominant, but there will be some wars to settle this. What were the consequences of the 1848, 1849 revolutions? I'm going to leave that to the next video.